Hi, welcome back to Real Auto Reports. Today we have the real video, the real review on this 2014 Lexus IS 350. This is the all-wheel drive and it's the F-Sport, which is why it's got that cool front end, and it's going to have some other neat features that we'll talk to you about in this detailed review. So let's jump in the car, get going, and see what this new vehicle from Lexus has to offer. Hi, so welcome back to Real Auto Reports. We are in this 2014 Lexus IS 350 all-wheel drive F-Sport. And I guess I just can't get used to how long the name is for this car, but it's a really neat car. It's a car that has a lot of personality. They're going for that more youthful market. And you know, I think I mentioned that it's a car that really, well, in our real first impressions, I know I mentioned how different this design is from the previous generation. And I really like what they've done with the body. The outside body has a lot of design, sculpting, angles. There are things about the outside that you just don't find on the previous generation IS, or really some of the previous generation compact sports sedans. And what's nice about, I guess, the IS from everything else is that it is not necessarily just a sports sedan. It can be a pretty comfortable compact or small, on the smaller side, four-door luxury entry-level vehicle. So you can get that IS 250 or the IS 350, which is what this is based on, and then you can add things like all-wheel drive and the F-Sport option like we have here. And remember, so in the F-Sport, there are some things that for 2014 will be special to this F-Sport. One of them is the gauge cluster and the computer that is incorporated in that gauge cluster. When you hit this button, it moves the gauge back and forth across the dashboard here in your instrument cluster so that it basically reveals, it slides to the right to reveal the trip computer, which you then control with these buttons out on the steering wheel. But mostly, this is a looks package in the F-Sport. It's going to be a package that you have because you're looking at something that's more sporty. You're going to have that more flared and designed front fascia. It's a unique fascia to the and unique grille to the F-Sport car. It is also going to come in colors like this red that is really eye-grabbing, and it's a metallic finish. You're going to have additional wheel options. So in the F-Sport, you get these granite multi-spoke, and they're a sports rim and tire with the all-wheel drive option, and in this particular model. So you can get a rear-wheel drive F-Sport and an all-wheel drive F-Sport. Now, why is that significant? Well, it's actually significant in a couple different areas. So let's talk about the engine and how that changes in transmission setups with the all-wheel drive. In all the IS 350s, you're going to have the 3.5-liter V6 engine. You're going to, along with that, get a general performance level of 306 horsepower. And in the rear-wheel drive, that's going to be good for 0 to 60 in about 5.6 seconds. Now, in the all-wheel drive, you get the same amount of horsepower, which is really nice because in a lot of cars we see, and even in the Lexus brand, we see a reduction in horsepower in the all-wheel drive versions of the larger vehicles. If you look at our LS460 review, you'll notice that that car actually has less horsepower than the with the all-wheel drive, and that's the white one on our YouTube page, has less horsepower than the silver LS460 rear-wheel drive that we saw in its pre-production phase. And so that's kind of interesting, and I like the fact that the performance levels are similar. And even so, in the 0 to 60 time in this F-Sport, you're going to see a 0 to 60 time of only 1/10 slower than the rear-wheel drive version of this car. And so that is a pretty nice statement of the engineering that goes into these cars. But in the F-Sport, you're going to see some other differences when you get the all-wheel drive versus the rear-wheel drive. So in this, because it's an all-wheel drive, when we click over here to the manual mode, we only have 6 speeds. If you were in the rear-wheel drive version of this car, you would have the 8-speed, the all-new 8-speed automatic transmission in the IS. Along with that, in the steering, we have the standard basic steering that most of these ISs come with, right? So there is an optional steering that is a multi-variable steering that you can get if you have the rear-wheel drive version of this F-Sport. So those are some different things that when you get the all-wheel drive, you're getting a great all-wheel drive system, but you are sacrificing some of the newer technology out of these cars based on the platform. The other thing about the IS in general is that it is a car that is a lot heavier than some of its competition. You know, it's about 3,700 pounds as tested here. And you don't actually notice it though. It's got a solid feel on the road. It's a car that handles impeccably, especially with this performance F-Sport suspension that is in this car. It is dynamite out on the road. We took this car up through the mountains to Vail and back here in Colorado, and it is impeccable out on the curves and the twisties. It's a very flat handling car, yet the suspension is still comfortable out on the road at highway speeds, where when you hit those potholes and bumps, you're going to notice it, but it's not as jarring as you might expect out of some other high performance, like if you're driving a real high performance sports car. And with the 0 to 60 time it has in the all-wheel drive in this particular combination of the IS, I think for climates such as Colorado or the great Northeast or the northern parts of the U.S. where we see inclement weather all the time, this is a car you're going to be able to drive year-round. And depending on how bad your climate is, you may not even have to put snow tires on it. But I bet with the F-Sport, at least, since it's not an all-season in the sense that it doesn't have the deeper tread pattern and everything, and there's no, it's not like a snow tire where it's siped in so that it can actually grab onto the ice. I bet you're going to want to consider 2 sets of wheels and tires for this car if you live in a really snowy climate, or a climate that has a lot of ice. Now, getting back to the car itself, we talked about in the real first impressions how different the outside is. Now, the outside is, I think, really pretty. I think it's aggressive. I think it's got nice lines. I also think that it is a look into the future of where Lexus wants to take the whole brand and design of these cars, because they need to keep going after younger people. And indeed, with this IS line of cars, they wanted to go after a median age of 41 years old, right in there, so about an average age of 41. And they also wanted to go after a 50-50 split male and female. So what that meant is that these cars had to appeal to both sexes, and that's what they wanted. They wanted everybody in their target audience. So, bracket that age a little bit, go from 30 to, let's say, 55, right? And they wanted everyone to feel that this was a neat car. And I've shown this car to a lot of different people in a lot of different age groups, and they really do react positively to how, the reaction I get is that it is either it looks aggressive or it's really sexy. And the people who say that it looks sexy tend to be my women friends. But, all in all, I have to agree with them. I think this car is sexy, and with the F-Sport gauges and you can hear the sound that it's making, that is from the noise maker under the hood. And I call it a noise maker, they call it something else. But the point of the matter is that they actually pipe sound into the car so that you can hear it above, that kind of 4,000 RPM area. When you're really getting into the power area or the power band of the car, you put your foot down and it just gives you a nice tone in the car. And then along with this car, you're going to get a lot of neat features. So what are the features that you're going to get? Those features include the dual climate control, and this is something to point out, that it's just the quality and the ingenuity that they've put into these cars that is different from the previous generation. You've got a touch sensor for, see, you just slide your finger up and down, and it's got a touch sensor for the AC and HVAC controls. I think that's really slick. You can also just tap the cold down arrow or the hot up arrow and it'll do the same. You've got real easy access to the dual feature too, which I like. In some of the Lexus models, you've got to fumble around for it, and in some of the competitive models, you know, the competitors out there, you have to find the dual in the system. I really like that the dual is a button right here that I can just hit, so when my passenger wants to control their side, it'll actually go there automatically if they start to play with their settings. But then if I want to turn it back so that I'm getting the same temperature throughout the car, I just hit that dual button to turn it off. So some great features. Everything is very reachable in this car for someone of my height, 6 foot or a little over. You know, I can reach the center here, but I don't need to reach the screen because I've got the mouse control that they've gone to in almost all of the Lexus vehicles. And in fact, I can't think of one right now that doesn't have this mouse control. Maybe that GX 460 that we saw earlier this year, maybe that one, I'd have to go back and think about it. But most of the Lexus, including the RX and the LS and the GS, all of their vehicles that I really have tested and seen in the last year or so have this control in them. So I think that's really positive. It means you don't have to reach up, and as you get used to it, it's a little funky till you get used to it. But once you do, you don't take your eyes off the road as much, and you don't have to reach out of your seat to get to the touch screen. So that allows them to, and this is what their engineers said, this allows them to put the screen further back on the dashboard, out of the way, and also more in the line of sight of where you're driving, so that you don't have to, divert your attention too much when you need to see things in the entertainment system. Of course, this vehicle will have the Lexus Inform system, and this Inform system has a whole app suite, so it'll have all sorts of interesting apps that you can deal with, including things like movie tickets and times and traffic and weather and all of that stuff that we've come to kind of expect in these cars. Push start, so push button start. You've got power mirrors, of course, power seats. But the thing that I did notice at almost $50,000 as tested is that this car does not have power folded mirrors or memory seats. And on the passenger side, you don't have a lumbar control. And that's something that my passengers noticed. You also do not have a panoramic roof option. You only have the single sunroof option. Not a bad thing. In fact, the only car that I can think of right now off the top of my head that has the panoramic roof option, I know the ES that we've seen does. I think the GS Hybrid also has the panoramic roof option. Almost $50,000. You can get it in other sports sedans that are bigger, like the Kia Optima, which is very well optioned. Maybe not quite Lexus. Some people would say it is at the Lexus threshold, especially in the new redesigned model. And then, of course, your Nissan Maxima and your Hyundai Sonata Hybrid will also have the panoramic roof options. So that's kind of interesting. And then one major problem that I found with this car that I don't like is that you can't see it, but we'll see if we can flash up a picture of this. Down here by the driver's front right leg is the hump. And the hump is to do with how they've designed the engine, transmission, and in the all-wheel drive, the transaxle setup. That means that what is happening here is that my leg is constantly bumping into this. It's actually pretty intrusive into the driver's area. And the other thing that I noticed about this car when I cross-compared this at the launch of the IS family and being out in San Francisco with the Lexus group and being out there to test these cars when they first came out, and also compare them to things like the C350 from Mercedes and the we also had the Audi out there, the Audi A4, and then we also had the BMW 335i. What was interesting is that this interior is definitely the most compact of all of these sports sedans, at least in my opinion. It's good. You're going to feel like the levels of the design, you're being encompassed a lot more, that you're sat down in and you're more race car like, whereas some of the other cars feel a little bit more spacious inside, and that hump goes to contributing to that. The other thing that I don't really care for about the IS format is that this back seat is a lot smaller than I really thought it would be. I have my briefcase back here behind me, and it barely slides in, like I can get my hand between it and the back of the seat. And so when you're a taller person, the back seat is not going to be very comfortable for your mid to tall, average people. Your shorter people are going to be fine. So things to keep in mind, but coming back to the livability, it does have the fold down back seats. One thing to keep in mind though, and I mentioned this in the real first impression, is that you have to click the unlock buttons at the very back of the trunk so that you can then pull the levers that are on the back shoulder areas of the rear seats. And if you didn't know that that feature was there, I think it would be a little frustrating. But all in all, this is an amazing car from Lexus. It has great quality control. I love the finishes, the carbon fiber look in the door trim here, along the dashboard, above the glove box. You've got contrast stitching, nice soft touch in places, multiple textures. All in all, Lexus is doing exactly what their people want them to do, and that's you, the customer. You want a good, solid car that will last a long time, and in this sense, be really fun to drive. And if you really like that sports aspect, take a look at this F-Sport. If you want something a little less expensive and still, encompassing this look and feel inside, take a look at the IS 250. That's going to be a little less horsepower, and then you can come up to the IS 350 line with the 306 horsepower. It is going to get about 19 miles per gallon in the city and 26 on the highway, so it's not bad from a fuel economy perspective, but definitely not a class leader. So we'll have the real wrap-up coming up next, so stay tuned. So that's the real video, the real review on this 2014 Lexus IS 350 all-wheel drive F-Sport. Yes, you can add a lot of things to the IS family, and the first is that 3.5 liter V6, just over 300 horsepower and a good 0 to 60 time, especially in the all-wheel drive, right about 5.7 seconds according to Lexus. That's 5.6 if you have the rear-wheel drive. Not a lot of loss for a lot of extra capability. You can also add the F-Sport, which gives you this great looks package, a unique grille to the IS family, and things like these alloy wheels here that are 18-inch and they're in that kind of granite color. They're really a nice thing that sets these F-Sports apart, and you'll notice the same thing if you go back and you look at the GS line and so on and so forth. There's things that specifically say F-Sport. We also like the new design cues. The first time they've separated these running lights from the headlight assembly. So if you go back and look at our first report on this car from Alameda Island, you'll see a comparison of the old generation and the new generation. After getting to drive this car for about a week, it is a great drive, but there are some things that we still think that they could improve on, and one of those is the hump in the driver's area that is right in the way of the accelerator pedal. It is a little irritating as you live with it daily. There's also some little things missing at an almost $50,000 price tag as tested, like memory seats and heated steering wheel and things like that we'd like to see, that you would see in the 3 Series in the same type of performance package. Now you're going to pay more for the 3 Series at the 335i, and we've test driven one of those this year as well. But all in all, Lexus has done an amazing job of taking the IS from dull and kind of everyday to exciting with one of the nicest bodies on a compact sports sedan we have seen. So good job to Lexus. Still room for improvement, and if you're in the market for one, go take a test drive, because it might surprise you. I'm Jonathan McGrew. This is Real Auto Reports from Real Auto Ranch, and we will see you down the road.